Fasted or not fasted? That is the question, which we're going to be answering when it comes to the ability to build muscle and strength in young, healthy individuals. Well, actually, this new study answered, and we're going to talk about, because this has been a completely understudied topic of interest, at least from my perspective, and I would assume anyone trying to tiptoe the how do I optimize my present day performance and long-term longevity conundrum. And all I'll say is the findings were not what I would have expected, and the researchers seem to be surprised too. Let's go. Yo, what is up? Welcome back to another week of How to Health. My name is Kevin. I run liftandbalance.com, where we take aim at all things health and longevity and do it in an odd, weird, interesting, and highly sarcastic way. This week in Should I Fast or Should I Chow, we are talking muscle strength and hypertrophy, aka muscle building, and how a time-restricted eating protocol impacts the ability for both when the individuals following said time-restricted eating protocol are training fasted. Yep, training in a straight-up energetic wasteland. Okay, that may have been a little dramatic, but essentially in the absence of any pre-workout fuel. Though, ironically, providing plenty of fuel for the social media addicted longevity nerd to fight in the comments with. But not you, of course, because you know all the downsides of chronic stress, especially when it comes to muscle and strength. Anyway, personally, this is a topic near and dear to my heart because, well, I train fasted and train pretty hard every single morning on a 15-ish hour fast starting from the late afternoon the day before. A fasting protocol which you can see all about in this video here. But as for the fasted training itself, the reasons I like it and thus do it are as follows. First, I just feel better starting my day with movement because it does a hell of a lot from a cellular and metabolic perspective, which puts my body in a position to have a damn day. From the blood flow and circadian alignment to the flurry of bioactive compounds and neurotrophic factors which result in less stress, improved mood, and enhanced cognition. And in my personal experience, there's nothing else that compares. Next, I just don't feel great working out hard and heavy after a meal. Maybe it's the type of training I do, maybe it's something else, but that's the way it is for me. So first and foremost, it fits my schedule and preference. Second, from a biologically tactical perspective, research has displayed over and over again how both exercise and fasting modulate a plethora of cellular and metabolic markers in a beneficial direction. Something that I like to believe may be enhanced in some respective areas when done together. This would be my longevity angle to the fasted training madness. Now, it is important to call out that there is not much conclusive evidence here to support this notion as a whole. Simply pockets of promise, as the data suggests that working out in a fasted state can make an organism more metabolically flexible, or increase their ability to seamlessly transition fuel substrates between carbohydrates and fatty acids, with additional data suggesting that exercise enhances our cellular cleanup processes mitophagy and autophagy, as well as stimulates the repair and refolding of misfolded proteins, something that extended daily fasting has also been shown to do. However, and this is a big however, conclusive evidence that doing these two things together, aka fasted exercise, will enhance these cellular processes are lacking. So the jury's still out. Closing the loop on my current approach, about an hour after my typical intense strength and cardiovascular workout, I begin to fuel up with a high protein meal to the tune of 60 to 80 grams from real whole food sources, usually a combo of fish and eggs. Now, this is a good time to call out that goals and context are super important. Meaning, what works for one person may not be the ideal strategy for another, based on their unique lifestyle variables and their goals. Sounds simple, I know, but This is where much of the online bickering stems from. And what I just went through before are some of my unique lifestyle variables and goals. Training for longevity with the preference to do so in the morning. All that being said, I cannot help but wonder if and what I am leaving on the table by not training fueled up. Specifically when it comes to the all-important strength and muscle mass. Two things, as you know, which are absolutely critical for longevity over time. And when it comes to data on this previous question, it's almost as scarce as that previously mentioned energy wasteland. Yeah, I know. Pretty wild. As the majority of studies that looked at the effects of time-restricted eating on strength and hypertrophy were conducted with individuals who were not well trained, eating in a calorie deficit, aka for muscle maintenance rather than growth, and also not training in a fasted state, meaning they trained during or after their feeding window, when they were all fueled up, providing us some interesting insights around training while following a TRE protocol, like the fact that TRE plus resistance exercise is effective for reducing body mass and body fat while preserving fat-free mass relative to non-fasting control diets, showing that it can be successful in maintaining strength and muscle mass in trained males and females for up to 12 months, but not telling us much about growth and performance, especially in healthy individuals, as we know, a key component to the longevity equation. That is why this first of its kind study was so interesting. Let's see what it found. To answer this very question, a group of researchers from California State University randomized 17 healthy and well-trained men and women to either a time-restricted eating group or controlled normal feeding group. Here they aim to explore the physiological effects of a structured progressive overload training regimen on individuals in a fasted versus fed state. But instead of going down the traditional path of allowing the TRE group to be in a calorie deficit and train in a fed state, they did the opposite, having the time-restricted eating group train fasted, but also in a 10% calorie surplus, eating with the specific goal to gain, which is something that has not been looked at before. Exciting, I know. So for the study, the TRE group followed a traditional 16-8 protocol, or daily 8-hour feeding window starting about an hour after their training session, followed by 16 hours of fasting until the next day. So it's safe to say that these individuals were training on a 13 to 14-hour fast, while the control group ate across a much wider 13-hour window. The key here being that the two groups consumed the same amount of total energy relative to their body composition, both being in a 10% calorie surplus. Protein intake was also high, landing at about 1 gram per pound of body weight. And during this time, both groups performed supervised resistance exercise training 4 times a week for 8 weeks, doing so in the aforementioned progressive overload fashion, meaning increasing the resistance or load through the 8 weeks to promote adaptations in strength and muscle growth. And to measure the primary outcomes of said changes in strength and muscle mass, physical performance tests of maximum strength or 1 rep maxes as well as muscle endurance were completed pre and post the 8-week intervention along with body composition measurements. So, with that, I bet you're wondering, because I know I am, what did they find? Well, first, the important stuff. Overall mood and sleep quality, collected via surveys, were consistent between the two groups. So hopefully everyone got good sleep and was happy along the way. That being said, there was a downtick in perceived energy levels for the fasting group, essentially indicating that the fasting group felt more tired more often, which in my eyes could also be an acute effect of not being adapted to eating on that type of schedule. But nonetheless, an interesting observation of this study, which brings us to the first big finding. Training volume, or the amount of reps the individuals were able to perform from a daily and overall perspective, were significantly lower in the time-restricted eating group compared to the fed controls, which kind of makes sense with that lower energy primer, we just talked about. That being said, both groups were able to increase maximal lower body and upper body strength measured by 1 rep max, along with overall muscle endurance, displaying that the hard training and good eating does in fact work despite the condensed feeding window. Now, when it comes to which group saw more strength gains, there was a slight edge observed in the fed group, specifically with the squat 1 rep max. But surprisingly, leg extensions, chest bench press, and overall strength were consistent between both groups, which, after remembering the significant volume difference between the two groups, is pretty interesting. Now we get to the even more surprising observation. The fact that the fasting group saw pretty much the same relative muscle growth measured by free fat mass, all while having less overall fat gain. You don't say. So in terms of body composition, the time-restricted eating group had better results, even though their strength gains were slightly worse. Having the researchers conclude both dietary approaches were executable and globally effective, and the ideal one really depends on the individual's goals and lifestyle variables, which, in my opinion, due to all of the uncertainty in this area when it comes to fasting, is kind of a win for those fasted exercisers out there. But that's just my 2 cents. Now, the researchers were also keen to point out the tremendous amounts of nuance involved when it comes to balancing training, nutrition, and life, noting that this was a small and relatively short study, but also an incredibly important one which provided some new insights for a group of individuals who want to keep optimizing the way they feel and perform not only today and tomorrow, but for the long run. People who train hard, eat hard, and hopefully sleep harder. There are also some very interesting questions around whether the results would be the same if this study was carried out for a year rather than 8 weeks. Specifically, if the widening gap in overall training volume would lead to a significant gap in overall strength and muscle mass, making fasted workouts progressively worse over time compared to fed ones. A question that I, for one, would personally love to know the answer to, but one we just don't have at this moment in time. What I can tell you is, oftentimes the best strategy when it comes to exercise, or what I like to call badonkadonking, is the one that can consistently get you up and at it on a daily basis. And at the end of the day, for the average person who is not training for a competition or pico top strength and muscle growth, which is the majority of the population, even the super longevity and health-minded cohort, just moving, ideally doing multi-joint compound movements with resistance and a progressive overload, getting the heart rate up from a cardiovascular perspective, consuming primarily real whole foods with a 1 gram per pound of body weight protein goal, managing stress and prioritizing high-quality circadian aligned sleep is going to matter much more than if you're training fasted or not. That's just the reality. At that point, it's likely much more of a preference thing than anything else. So remember that before hopping into any battles in the comments of a controversial social media post. That stress ain't worth the sacrifice and gains. Yeah, stress be doing that. So chill out and keep moving that ass.